What's up, guys? Welcome back. Today we are doing a video about the F3, specifically old versus new. This knife is on loan for me from my buddy Rob. These recently dropped on Recon 1, and it is in an Alutex, which is like a aluminum alloy that is anodized to this amazing color. We'll get more into that in a second. And this is my personal F3 that I traded for with my other buddy, and it is a white G10 older version. I wanted to start this video off by actually just saying thank you. Thank you for supporting the channel. You guys have been awesome. Like, the channel's grown a ton lately. I'm a very little channel. And I just really appreciate all of you coming over here and checking out my videos and watching and commenting and all that stuff. And I just wanted to say I really appreciate you, and I appreciate my friends that send me knives to, check out and tell me I should make videos with them, because I just really appreciate that. You guys are awesome, so thank you very much for being here. So let's get into this. I'm going to put a disclaimer here too. These knives aren't super different, so I'm actually going to hijack this video a little bit to talk about why the details matter. But we'll talk about the differences first for these F3s. So let's just start with my F3. So this is old school F3. I think it's first or second gen, but it is pretty basic, the original design. It is in white G10, and it is in CTS 40 CP, which is a tool steel. Not a bad steel at all. And it has a great Shiro action. It's a liner lock F3, pretty par for the course. And that's that. It's got the blue highlights. Titanium pocket clip. This was a special edition. I don't remember where or for what. I found it at one point, but it was on a kind of old school website, and I don't know if they even sell knives anymore. If you know, let me know in the comments. But yeah, so that's this one. And then this one is, like I said, Rob's knife, and it is orange Alutex, which is a aluminum alloy, and in LMAX, and these were available exclusively on Recon 1. I was really tempted to pick one up. And I was really close to talking Rob into letting me keep this one. Obviously, I would trade him something or buy it off of him. But he loves it, and I totally respect that and understand it. And I just want you to get a good look at these incredible scales. This is aluminum. It's really hard to get across. It's honestly like a fish scale. It's really, really neat. And the grip and the handle is awesome. Like, it just feels great in the hand. So let's talk about the differences between a Gen 1 and I think they're at Gen 4. Yeah, I believe, or Gen 5. I can't remember exactly. So Shiro is the master. Sergei Shirogorov and his team, they are the master of iterations, right? Their knives evolve every single year a tiny bit. But then there are these bigger jumps that occur that are more obvious. That being said, like I said, this Gen 1 and this most recent gen, they are not that different, but they really exemplify the thing that I want to talk about, which is that the details matter, and they really make a difference in a knife. And it's rare that you get to compare the details across the same model, right? Because a lot of knife makers, not a lot, but knife makers take knives and they evolve them, or they just do new models. But the evolutions are usually very large. And Shirogorov is the master of this iteration type evolution. But it really exemplifies that the details matter. So let's talk about where the differences are in these. And there's not that many. The first very obvious one is actually the blade shape. So this is definitely the biggest difference. The blade shape on these two is different. If you didn't see them side by side, you wouldn't maybe know, but as you can see, like, this blade is more straight back, this blade is more at an angle back and comes back a little further to the plunge grind, and this one kind of flattens out more. But this has a little bit more of a upswept belly, and then the drop is just a little bit, I'm pointing with the knives, The drop is just a little bit more extreme on this. That really actually makes a difference with the usability of the knife. I've only carried this, it's on loan from Rob, so I actually wasn't carrying it because it's so nice. And then he texted me this morning and said, hey, make sure you carry that F3. So I said, bend my arm, why don't you? And so I carried it today and I did use it. And it does make a really big difference. I didn't use it enough to, really account for being able to tell the difference, or between these two, but this actually shares basically the identical blade shape to the F93. You can see how close those are. It's a tiny bit different, but they're really close. And these are both my knives, the old school F3 and the F93. Sorry, I said F93, F95. And there's a little bit more belly that exists on the F95 and the F93, though the F93 it looks like it has a tiny bit more of a drop. That little bit more belly makes a huge difference in carrying the knife to me. It feels like it pushes through material a little bit better. I don't know how to describe it unless you've carried a lot of different knives. They look so super similar, but when you carry them back to back, it does definitely make a difference. So that's the biggest difference on these knives. Just if you're wanting to know, like, what's the biggest difference, then you can click away because that's it. Let's get into the other smaller differences. And like I said, I was hoping these would be more different, but they're actually very similar. And it's an iteration, right? And it hasn't changed that much, but enough to make a difference. Like I want one of these. I want a modern gen F3. I think the difference is significant enough, and I'm not someone that needs every version of a knife. But this difference is significant enough just in the tiny details that it makes me want one. So another difference is there's jimping on top and a tiny bit of milling. It's kind of the cockpit type thing that they've been doing lately. Not really the cockpit because that's like more on the Astrum and stuff, but there's this little swedge on top and the jimping. Not super functional jimping, but I like the way it feels. As you can see on the old school F3, there's nothing, just a flat spine. With that jimping actually comes the illusion of this being thinner blade stock too, but it's only thinner where that jimping is. I think they are identical at the tip. I should get calipers and measure them. What's interesting though is that if you look, and this is going to be either show if they're closed, the starting blade stock for the older F3 is thicker. You see on the right side? It is thicker, but the resulting blade stock is the same at the tip, but the narrowing with this little swedge on top makes it appear thinner on the newer F3. Another difference between the two, small difference, is that the newer F3 uses a smaller style hardware that Shiro does. See, this is the bigger hardware for that hardware on the handle, as well as on the pocket clip. I think that's a good detail. It makes it look a little bit less clunky, I think, which describing a Shiro as clunky is kind of ridiculous. The other difference is they don't do this milling pocket around the hardware. It's just set in there these days. Another minute difference. The chamfer on the back of the scales for this is a tiny bit softer, as in this is a little bit more rounded, whereas the chamfer on this, there is a chamfer, again, tiny iterations, is a little bit more of an edge where you can feel it. I can't feel any edge on this one. Tiny detail. Backspacer design. Backspacer is a tiny bit raised on this. There we go. Coming out to the lanyard hole that's inset into the scales. Backspacer is not raised on this, it is geared, as you can see. And out to the lanyard hole. along with that, you can see that there's actually milling that matches the gearing. Barely visible on camera. And here, instead of that, they have a deep swedge that goes alongside the backspacer, kind of giving it the illusion of being a floating backspacer. Again, these details, the differences are not huge by any means, but they are significant, and they make the knives feel significantly different to me, even though I can tell they're the same knife, obviously. But the quality difference, as far as like the polish level, right? Polish level matters, and the details matter, and that's kind of what I'm going to get into here in a second. So those are all the major differences. Along with the details, you can see that Shirogorov's process has, I think, gotten more refined over the years. The clearest example on these knives is that the gap around the pivot hardware for the old school F3, you can see that there's a bit of a gap there. Don't mind the gunk in there. Whereas with this one, there's no gap between the pivot and the pivot collar. Yeah, really basic differences. If you said to me you're insane for saying it matters, maybe I am, but we're collectors, right? And those differences is what keeps us going, right? The difference between one model and another, not even between the same makers, but like just the steps in the collecting process. And that's what I kind of want to hijack this video to talk about a little more, because we have these Shiros, right? And they're a great example of how the little details matter, and just in the little polish things, whatever, because I can compare them side by side. But it's, if once you're talking about that, you kind of you are forced into the conversation of like, why not just have a pair of two, right? Pair of two, in my opinion, is like the cream of the crop basic knife. Like, if someone is not a knife guy but likes knives, if that makes sense, I'm like, get a pair of two. If you're willing to spend a couple $100, that's the one knife. And I love the pair of two. I started out on Spyderco, and functionality wise, there's not a lot to complain about. But you start getting into the details, like we were just talking about, and they start to matter. Like, I think the first evolution that occurs, this is kind of weird framing, I apologize. Like, I'd say the first big step that occurs in the collecting journey is like, well, not anymore because there's more of these, but when I started collecting, it was like your first Sebenza or your first CRK. This is not a Sebenza. This is this is an Nkosi. Used to be the Sebenza 25, but other history lesson. So I feel like for me, when I started collecting, that was the first big step. It was getting into your first expensive knife, right? These Nkosi or Sebenza, they cost twice what this costs, right? Is it twice the usefulness? No. It's 100% not twice the usefulness. Both of these will cut. This is actually in Crucarda, or Crewwear rather, and I like Crewwear better than I like, well, actually that's a strong statement because this is S35. I really like S35, but Crewwear is a great steel. Arguably better than CTS 204P, which is what this white F3 is in. And this costs more than this. So like, what's the point of stepping up? This is as functional as it gets. And you could go further down the line of functionality, like God forbid a CJRB Pyrite. I'm so sick of that knife, but it's a great budget knife. Or a Voss-Seed Raccoon. I love the Voss-Seed Raccoon. Like, it arguably doesn't get more functional than that, but it's literally all in the details, right? And that's why I'm just bringing this up, is because I'm talking about how these are very similar, but the details matter. I like this significantly more. I like carrying this more. It feels more finished. So what's the big jump between a paramilitary 2, a $200 end all be all, most functional. Like, it doesn't get more functional than this. And Chris Reeve. Well, I mean, you can just, there's hundreds of differences, right? I mean, they're obviously different knives, but look at the scales, right? Sandwich construction scales. Nice. They rounded the corners. Pretty cool. There's holes all over the knife. I mean, it doesn't feel bad in the hand. The ergos are good. Action's pretty good. But that's that. It's like you slap it together, assembly line. If you told me this took an hour to make, I'd believe you. Then the next step, the big step in a collecting journey is getting something like this, a CRK, Hinderer, Strider, whatever it is. And you're going to start to look at this and you're like, wait a second. The amount of work that go into the details of this is far, far more than the Para 2, the Spyderco. This is just kind of slapped together quick on the belt sander. You start looking at the chamfering, the matching scale sides where they come to a point with the beautiful chamfer, the scallop for the lock bar axis, how close that blade is to the handles, the fact that the pocket clip doesn't rest on the actual lock bar but rests on the handle but acts as an over travel stop. No useless holes. You start to look at these details and you start to realize, oh, well, the details matter, right? This is an extreme example, obviously, but it's a jump that we've all made. So then you start, getting even more nuanced with your. If you're watching this video, you're probably a collector, but I just wanted to talk about this. It's my channel. I want to talk about these things. I like talking about knives. This jump is a pretty clear jump. You just have to get past it's not more functional. But the quality differences and the fit and finish differences are extremely clear. They abundantly, you hand this to a non-knife person, they're going to say, this is a knife. This is a knife. This is a nice, I can't even say, a nicer knife. Hands down. Even like it's heavier, right? I mean, that's silly, but it's also all made out of titanium, which feels significantly nicer. But that's pretty clear. But then you start picking things apart like I did with these two. And then you start pulling in, more expensive knives. And again, this is as functional as this and this and this and this. But this, the Bradley Moraes Vector made for me, every detail on this knife was thought out by Bradley and hand done. Even the way the pocket clip is, it's just standoffs, but it's the best pocket clip, one of the best pocket clips I've ever seen. A hand-turned zirconium thumb stud, just beautiful. Not more functional than the CRK. Looks a hell of a lot better, in my opinion. I don't like that, how the blue wears off. But just the detail, right? We talked about the scallop for the lock bar axis on the Inkosi. Great. Yeah, that's okay. Well, look at the scallop that Bradley does. Well, it's fantastic. And it acts as a perfect ramp to point your thumb in the direction to flick it out perfectly. That's just a tiny detail, and it doesn't make the knife more functional, but it is a detail. And this costs twice as much as this, right? I mean, just every little thing that Bradley did on this knife. The slight contouring on the handle. The floating Damasteel backspacer. It's the details. This is not a better, more functional knife than this. but the details make it make a difference, right? The hand satin blade. Also, Bradley does an incredible edge. This knife was made for me by Bradley, and this is probably one of my most precious knives in my collection. And I mean, that carbon fiber. Come on. I'm not a big carbon fiber guy, but gold carbon fiber is just, there's something about that gold fleck. Again, not more functional. It's in the details. I don't know why I'm talking about this, but, well, actually I do. It's because these F3s weren't that different. And I was like, well, what do I talk about? Because I like this so much more, and it doesn't make sense because it's not like it's that much better than this. And then the final, details piece I wanted to bring in. And honestly, this is a McGinnis, by the way, McGinnis Notorious. The details on the McGinnis Notorious and the Bradley Moraeus are about the same. Like, they're both extremely detail orientated. And it just was the last, example of a knife that's not more functional and arguably, or it definitely isn't more functional than a Spyderco Paramilitary 2, but it is better because of the details. But this is where the nuance starts to come in, because you have to look at it with the eyes of a collector, right? That these holes are all beautifully chamfered on the inside, that there's like a tiny little divot here, so when you're holding it, your finger sits there. The hand satin finish, the engraved signature on the inside, the model number and name on the scale, the, in my opinion, really good detent for the action that's made for, which is that Spidey flick. But the tiny details, the flush backspacer, the texturing on the carbon fiber, but the tiny details of this, all of a sudden now you're kind of a crazy person, because you hand these two to someone who's not a knife collector, and you ask them which one's the more expensive knife, right? And actually, I don't know. It's like a 50-50 in my brain, like what someone would just pick, right? That'd be an interesting experiment. Like, which one is more expensive? So and I love this knife. It is a, far better knife than the CRK, but it is definitely not more functional. Like, at the end of the day, it might be less functional because it's got thinner blade stock and more of a hollow grind. So, I mean, it's better at, slicey things. You can't really tell the thinner blade stock because this is rounded. But, like, as far as, like, durability, this is definitely more durable. But, again, you hand these to a knife guy, and he's going to pick this up and be like, oh, wow. And he's going to pick this up and be like, that's a CRK. But we're all crazy. The details, the differences between this to this, pretty obvious. The differences between this to this and this, really not that obvious unless you're a crazy person like we are. Knife collectors, we just are absolutely crazy. And that is kind of where this F3 conversation brought me, because Rob was like, you should compare the F3s, your F3 and mine. I was like, yeah, they're going to be so different. And they're not. But the details matter. These knives are the same knife, but the new one is significantly nicer in my mind. It feels like a higher quality knife just because of the finishing details. The action's a little bit better than on this one, but I think it's just because this one's old. This is multi-roll bearing. So they're super similar. I mean, you look at the hand profile. They both feel the hand. They both feel great in the hand the same. That didn't make a lot of sense. But they both feel really good in the hand. They both slice really well. They're both kind of the full flat grind. This has a little bit of a, bevel at the top, but essentially full flat grind. They function almost the same, but this one is preferable. It feels higher quality. And the differences are tiny, but the details do matter. So all that to be said, Shirogorov has iterated and they've mastered the details to make things better. This is better than this. you know, and we're all about the details. That's what collecting is about. So let me know what you think about the details being an excuse for this costing table, you know, more than twice as much as this. And don't even talk about the aftermarket, right? Like, let me know if that is just ridiculous to you, because it kind of is ridiculous to me, but also I'm obsessed with it. I love knives. I love the details that make them better, but also better subjective. You know, Dirk just had this McGinnis and he didn't love it. That's totally fine. Like it just is one of those things that, like, it's all subjective. If they were if there was not subjectivity in any type of knife collecting or knife making, I mean, we'd all carry a pair of two, right? Actually, we'd probably all carry a bug out. Ugh. So I don't know. I'm just talking. It's just, I just was comparing these, and they're not that different, but this is better. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will catch you on the next one.